Juan, thank you very much. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes, if we can, is engage in dialogue. And maybe one objective that I'd like to target would be finding the nexus, the intersection between these three topics that on the surface don't seem terribly connected, other than the fact that they are examples of research and work and manifestations deploying or interacting with or resolving work in the digital sphere. I'd also like to bring it back to maybe the non-digital sphere and see where this digital work is coming from, where it's going to, and how it relates, I guess, in the simplest terms, to the non-digital world. So I'd like to start with a question to Andrea and Marcus about your interesting attempts to, I guess I would call it curating experience, or maybe that's not exactly right. Let me back up a little bit. I would say, anyway, one of the chief responsibilities of the architect is to do that, is to curate human experience. So people tell us about themselves, cultures reveal themselves, and it is our job to represent through the filter of our own experiences, our own creativity, our own biases, the experience of say, our client. And what you're doing almost seems like you're turning that on its head, that you're creating a mechanism by which the client can actually curate their own experience. So if that's true, that's to maybe make reference to Juan's idea that we have to reestablish a definition or expand the definition of architecture, and in so doing, think about the role of the architect. Are you worried that we're giving something up by creating kind of an autonomous machine, or an object that is capable of autonomous response without the intervention of a creative architect?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to begin the discussion. And I think that there are maybe some different ways to answer that I'm thinking about. I would say, just to begin, with the project, we're interested really in kind of how people are interacting with everyday objects and spaces and places in the current state of architecture, generally speaking, interior architecture. But we're also, I think, really interested in the potential of two things: the potential of a material, maybe as a design process, and also as an engagement, and then also the potential of technology to play a role or to be a partner in the design process beyond the role of a typical interface such as Rhino, something that becomes, that sort of transcends technology and starts to become a real part of the physical environment. And I think, you know, the client or the user for us is really an important part of it, because, you know, we're thinking about technology not just being something that is static, but it has more kind of a more fluid role in the process of the project, meaning that people and technology and surfaces and architecture can all, in some ways, not just coexist, but offer something. I think there's a critique there too of what it offers, but I think the interesting part for us is that it does offer something.
Yeah,
Andrea.
I think adding.
I'm sorry.
No, just to complement that, I think that's really interesting that in our case, we were thinking not to show exactly information on a screen, because we have enough problems nowadays as some diseases as FOMO or something like that, that people have just to interact with screens. So we've tried for it to be a multisensory element that people could see what they are feeling in a material, not on a screen. And also what you said was really interesting, Tobias, about letting information, what information do I want to see without me filtering it, that information. And I think it's something that came to our minds. And I think what we are showing is something really simple as a calm or aroused feeling that you're having. But we thought about another thing on the table that I think it's interesting to share. It's like when you realize this information, not in your sector of the table, but in the sector of the other person. So you exchange the data. What you're feeling, you're visualizing on the other person's side of the table. And this, I think it's an evolution for our work, because I think this showing what you feeling on the other person, it says a lot, you know, that you're exchanging feelings, that you're really not a separate entity for another human being.
Yeah. When you were talking, I really was thinking about maybe the eventual application. You know, I thought that the idea of maybe creating a machine that reveals somehow the emotional state of a person, you know, that could be troubling in some ways. Actually, it's kind of like you know, working with electrodes of a lie detector strapped to you, but leaving that aside for the moment, I can certainly imagine the unbelievable potential on a larger scale to reflect evolving changes in a greater environment. So for example, on building facades, what is the mood of the city? What is the mood of the pedestrian, the mass? What is the relationship that changes between one building and another, say with the changing trajectories of the sun?
Yes, and I think that just to close that, I think it's important to notice that if the person is not feeling, doesn't want to use the sensor, the band sensor, she can just sit on the table and not use it. You know, it's a plus that you can choose if you want to use it or not. I think it can work both ways. I think it's important in any technological device to let the people choose what they want to share. Or it's, yeah.
It's interesting. I think I could comment maybe on what you're kind of bringing up as a maybe a provocation about what this would be like if it were positioned in an urban environment, or maybe at a larger environment, something like that, you know, the potential of that or the dynamic of that could change, I think, in really interesting ways, some unexpected perhaps. I think that there are some interesting correlations with the way that we live today, with how internet is connected to our lives, such as the Internet of Things, and how objects now have internet connectivity. Everything really is connected to the internet now that's purchased new. And this is something that really, I think, as an idea for us, you know, might not be a passive system, but could be really, or maybe not a dormant system, but something that's always active and something that's always alive, whether it's, you know, really being kind of interacted with, whether it's moving or not, it's still always present in a space or in a place as a place. And I think, you know, as we sort of become more comfortable with technologies that are part of our bodies, you know, people, as Andrea is describing, could have the choice to move further into this or bypass it altogether. It starts to become a commentary maybe on how we are, you know, interacting with our architecture as a society.
Oh, it has enormous implications, particularly with the idea in a broader sense of how we're interacting with architecture. If you consider that in some ways really undermining all the traditional bases of architecture. I know I'm being purposely vague. I'd like you to just hold on 1 second, because I'm going to ask Denise a question that is really addressed to you folks as well, and maybe we can create a broader dialogue. So if I can address Denise, when you were presenting the case study of the work your students who were doing beautiful work, and they were motivated by love and compassion, and trying to establish kind of a foundation of meaning, social meaning for their work. It was very, very nice to see. But you were really layering a lot of meaning and potential that could be expressed through the relatively simple digital manufacturing that I'm assuming happened there with CNC machines and the routers and so on. But for some reason, I was thinking back to the book Nature of Materials, which was by Henry Russell Hitchcock. He wrote in 1942. It was kind of a look back at the say the first half of the career of Frank Lloyd Wright. Now the title, In the Nature of Materials, and then it was elucidated in the text, looked or defined the methodology of Wright through the filter of his relationship to, or through his relationship to materiality. So many of the decisions that he made had to do, you know, with a kind of an interpretive relationship with materiality. So, and that is, you know, that's the nature of architecture, has been the nature of architecture pretty much forever. So we are at a kind of a crossroads now, aren't we? Where as the previous discussion kind of defined architecture maybe as something that is made with light and shadow, rather than, you know, bricks and mortar. So I wonder if you can talk about that just a little bit. What we are gaining, I think you described very eloquently. What are we losing?
Okay.
If anything.
I don't know if I can define what we are losing. I'm very optimistic, of course, person. I prefer to see what we are going to gain with this digital world, and the modification that it came by this issue. I saw it, I see it as a tool that can potentialize our creativity. And in this case, the argument that we are discussing, I think it's about color, not only shadow and light, but color. This is the most interesting way to see this kind of experience we are taking in this kind of classes. I'm very interested in the material way to express some meaning. In this sense, we are always search for a kind of expression with this kind of source we are seeking through art and literature. I think we pursue a way to express better with this kind of tools we have today. I don't know if I answer your question. It's very abstract one, but I think it's a kind of sorry, you can say.
Denise, can you one day we'll be printing an entire house, an entire building, an entire, say, modular component?
Oh yeah.
How do you feel? How do you feel about that?
I feel
will that be the end?
I think we are just in the beginning of this path.
Right.
Yeah, I see digital world as a huge source of potentials. This is one of this. I think we are just beginning this path. And I see this as an enthusiastic way to multiply our potential of expression in architecture. That's what I mean.
Denise, would you care to comment on that? Sorry, Andrea or Marcus?
Yes, I think that this positive vision of Denise about the digital fabrication is really interesting, and it really resonates with what I believe, because I think that we have to understand technology, and in order to propose a better future, because it's happening. A lot of things are happening now, and we are creating machines, we are creating softwares. We have to propose better machine, better software, more empathic ones. And for that, I think that what the work of Denise, what Juan explained, is trying to use technology as a way, not as a concept per se. This is very nice, because this brings a reflection. This brings, yes, a deeper reflection in other subjects, a greater empathy, a reflection on equality, because technology is not the focus. Technology is a way to understand what's happening and trying to build things and trying to propose new things through that.
And maybe I can bring in Juan into the discussion and kind of extend that question. One of the things I really appreciated about your presentation is how you defined architecture not only by what it does, but then you kind of broke down some characteristic of the object, the ideal, the plastic, the data definitions, and its context or role in the environment, I guess. And I think it alludes to one of the things that most architects are drawn to in our profession, which is a kind of multifarious nature of what we do. The need to be simultaneous, to tell many stories at the same time, to solve many problems at the same time, to respond to many social concerns, to the concern of the individual, the concern of the group, and so on. So any attempt to define architecture as a single thing, as you alluded to, is bound to fail, isn't it? So my question has to do with the idea of object or architecture as atmospheric. So I take that term to mean environmental in the broadest sense, something that represents a physical form, something that projects personal or social meaning. You mentioned in the chat that the group had prior to going on air that you met with Oscar Neumeier.
Yeah, Niemeyer. Yeah.
So, he was obviously very tactile architect or sculptural.
Yeah.
A sculptor maybe, who worked in architecture. And I think he would probably agree with those four definitions. And also, of course, the idea that architecture is what it is. So how would you, what is your response to the layering over the process that Oscar Niemeyer and other architects say of the pre-digital age practiced? How do you think that they would respond? What would Niemeyer do with current technology that he did not or was unable to do in the past? Or is there a possibility he might reject it in its entirety?
Well, first, I think that Niemeyer would have, everything that we will do will be speculative because we actually don't know, what he could have reacted. But I think he would have embraced high technology because in his project, in his life work project, he was developing what was the state-of-the-art technology at the time, that was reinforced concrete. So he understood that in order to enter into the modernist whole program, international program. And but I think he would have absorbed probably the new technologies, but he will always connect that to his culture, to his Brazilian culture. That was something that he was always stressing. So it would not have been something purely technological. Probably he would have dealt with a more intellectual approach, but that could be rooted or grounded into the Brazilian culture. That, by the way, is very rich. There is a very mix of things in the Brazilian culture that he could have picked many topics from there and expand what other maybe latitudes do with technology. But beyond, above all that, he was very clear in something. He always said that beauty is the most important function of architecture. So whatever technology he would have used, whatever, let's say, intellectual approach, he would always go to the tactile, to the sensual part of architecture. That probably is something that maybe is not deeply discussed in many schools today, because we are very, very busy trying to understand what is going on with all this technology and all that. And sometimes we forget that maybe architecture is very simple. You know, architecture has to do with the sensual quality of things, something I try to describe in my talk. And that sensuality is actually what connects us to technology and to the environment and probably to other humans. I was also thinking about the first two questions that you asked, the first to Andrea Macruz and then to Denise, and I have some insights about that. I think the first one, you said, you talk about the autonomous, about the autonomy of the object, how that could go, you know, in the future. You were asking that if what we have achieved with all this. And I think that we are somehow in the midway to get somewhere. I think we still are in a primitive state of technology, of this technology that we are somehow discovering and developing. So I think we are not yet there. If we compare this to the to modernism of the 20th century, we see that the modern project was, they had manifestos, they have a very clear agenda, but we don't have that today because, and that's very good, you know, because today, as you perceive from the talk we did today, every architect could have the freedom to speak his mind. I mean, to engage in a very different way about architecture. But in those days, they have a clear agenda and they have manifestos and they were interconnecting fine arts with architecture, but everything was always around this big umbrella that we call modernism. And so they were very clear where they were trying to get to. But I think we are in the midway of something and we are not so clear yet. And that's very good because we can have a lot of fun in the process of discovering where we're going to. And for the second question that you ask, what we are losing, what are we losing, excuse me, I think, yes, maybe we have losing something, and we have losing probably to be, we as humans, in the midway between desire and reality, between our desires and the reality, you know, the reality of building, the reality of making things, because it's technology which is in the midway of this. So it's not us. That was, for instance, completely different from the from craftsmanship, that you have a direct connection to what we do. So there is nothing in between you and the thing that you are creating. But I'm not saying this in a nostalgic way. You know, I will never be nostalgic. I think always in the future. I think the future is always something very powerful. But I mean, yes, we are losing to be actually in the midway of this process of connecting our desires, our sane ambitions with reality.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
I think we're getting somewhat close to the end. I just want to maybe make a very quick response to that question of what are we losing. Maybe change it just a little bit to ask who would be losing. And I think probably we'd be remiss if we didn't really think about the social implications, the political implications of the work that architects do, particularly in this moment in history where we are facing many questions about the question, what the idea of who controls what in the evolution of society. I suppose we don't really have a lot of time to talk about that. It seems clear that, you know, architecture is, I suppose, the purview of an elite. We make decisions for others on behest of even, you know, other levels of the social structure. But maybe that's for next time. I am just going to go over to the chat, and I believe there is a question for Marcus and Andrea. I'm not exactly sure I understand it fully. It says, if the art pieces are not presented with a table, oh, I see. I guess where else could this technology be implemented if it were not on a table? Or maybe they're asking, was the kind of interaction that happened around a table the driver for the work that you did and the decisions that you made?
I think it could be applied everywhere, because in all furniture, because what we are trying to make clear here is that a lot of designers are making kind of living furniture, because when you have something that relates more to you, you tend to throw it out less. So you create a more deep relationship between the human that is using and the objects. You discard less, you generate less garbage. So I think if all furniture design pieces could be more, could have more functions and relate to the human being in other ways, I think it would be very useful for us. And I think that's it. Marcus, you wanted to add something?
I think it's an interesting question. We thought about that in the beginning of the project, for sure, thinking about scale and thinking about the size of an object versus the size of a room versus the size of a building. And I think there are also some really interesting discussions about size versus scale that come up with that conversation. In the end, I think we're interested in how it can, become an accommodating project, maybe scalar, but also something that accommodates the size of a table or a piece of furniture, or something that's the scale of one person or two people, but also, what happens to this as it moves and becomes maybe more dynamic and moves into the scale of a room. And I think that, there was also an idea brought up earlier, I think by Tobias, about this also becoming a facade. And I think about this as one that is a responsive project, a responsive material system. But I think one thing that we're trying to make a distinction with regarding this is that it's responsive, but it's also in a certain way sensitive because of the incorporation of a new technology, maybe not new to society, but new to architecture, and how this could become something that is specifically calibrated or pointed towards people in space, as the maybe pillars of our profession, things like light, structure, mass, threshold. These kinds of things also, of course, play a role in architecture, but they tend to, kind of operate at the level of a poetic nature visually, where ours is really kind of interested in becoming a bit more responsive or a bit more active in how it can potentially interact with people in a space, or at the very least, maybe it's the opposite, how a person could make a choice to become engaged with an architecture if they are so inclined to do so.
What I also find interesting on that note is, furniture is very object oriented. And I know that when I teach furniture class, one of the things we really have difficulty in is helping the students kind of break away from, those many prototypes that are kind of embedded, that library of industrial design history, if you will, that has kind of subtly made its way into our unconscious creative foundation. But in your case, you really weren't concerned about that. It was really not about an object. It was about an entirely new set of responses. It was about emotional and intellectual and dynamic experiences. And the piece itself, the form of the piece, scale of the piece was really, somewhat less important. So in a way, that also quite radical reorientation of our relationship to the design of things that are useful to humanity.
Yeah.
Well, let me see. I think we have another question here. It's more of a technical question. Are there any apps, softwares, or websites that you would recommend for these for site analysis? Not exactly sure who that's addressed to, but I think there's probably, we weren't really talking about architecture particularly. Maybe that was for Juan, but I think there, the idea of understanding the site is one that obviously very, very important to us, and the data would depend on where you were. I'm not 100% sure that question fits into the particular presentation of how you
I would
folks-
say that softwares that I've used in the past would be Ladybug and Honeybee do these things. Maybe if it's a student, they could explore, those two plugins, Grasshopper plugins. Ladybee and Honeybee kind of tend to speak towards environmental issues and could be useful for site analysis, for example, or how to approach a site. Yeah,
and also I think 3D Max for simulating wind and SunPath. I think it's nice. 3D Max has some nice accessories as well.
Yes, I think that there are many softwares today. I mean, that maybe almost all the softwares has that. I mean, has that included also. Besides that, so I don't want to name any software specific, but I think that that's maybe 10 years ago was not so sophisticated in the softwares. But I think any software today can have that, or as Marcus and Andrea said, you can have a plugin that you can connect it to your main software. So it's very easy to use in any software. Yeah. Excuse me.
Representing the old school. Go to the. Said representing the older generation of architects. I also need to remind you to go to the site before you start designing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
I just would like briefly to comment on something that you addressed, Tobias and Juan, about technology. I think I went to Italy to do an internship there and to work with design, and luxury design industry, they do something really nice. They could, especially in Italy, that you have these artisans that are really important, and the crafting part, they in those industries, like the factory that produces the furniture, sofa, tables, etc., they could analyze where they could take the most, they reached a kind of balance that's really interesting. They use technology to lower the prices of the furniture design, but they use craftsmanship exactly when they need to use, so the artifact is well constructed. This is very interesting because they could balance precisely where to use a lot of machines. So you see these industries, these factories is really full of technological machines, but at the same time, they value a lot the artisans and where to use their work to be perfect. I think this is a good way they do things.
Way to end that.
That's right.
It's an evolution. It's not a revolution. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And as Juan also alluded, I think everyone is cognizant that architecture is an amalgamation of art, of technology, of craft, of concern about the history and about a curiosity about the future. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I thought the dialogue was really fantastic. I wish we could continue for several more minutes, but I have been advised that it's time to wrap things up and to remind participants especially about a few things. I think Denise noted earlier, and I'm going to reiterate that after the webinar ends, viewers are requested to submit answers to a survey. It's a Zoom survey. So please stick around for a few minutes. In addition, ACIID will be conducting another event that is currently scheduled for the end of November. It is going to coincide with the launching of a book that is going to be focused on virtual design. And then in addition, mark your calendar. Virtual Design Week will end on August 30th with a closing program that is titled Mycelium to Dry Your Eyes. It's a virtual sound bath and a live guided meditation, which will be hosted on Minecraft by Bianca Caragüe and Bump Galaxy. Lastly, you are all invited to visit the Virtual Design Week exhibition and gallery at acid.com/VDW Gallery. So Virtual Design Week Gallery. So Andrea, Marcus, Denise, Juan, and Denise Ayado in Manila. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for participating in the discussion, and hope we have a chance to deepen these investigations individually and collectively. And I also would be remiss if I didn't thank the many audience participants who are scattered around the world. Thank you very, very much for your interest and your support. And I hope that tonight's dialogue and presentations also were stimulative for your own work and your own perception of the role of design in your life and the role of design to society. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah, Denise and Juan, thank you. I really enjoyed hearing about your work, and pleasure to see you both and get to know you. I hope we can stay in contact in the future.
Yes.
Really interesting.
Hope we can meet personally someday.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we should do something with this. Yeah. Thanks to you, and I'm really glad to share, this moment with all of you. It was really enlightening. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you,
Andrea, Denise, Juan, and Marcus. Thank you, everyone who stayed with us. Okay. Have a good night. Or
You
have
too.
You too.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.